Rishi Reddi is the author of the story collection Karma and Other Stories, which received the 2008 LL Winship PEN New England Award for Fiction. Her work appears in Best American Short Stories 2005, has been broadcast on National Public Radio, and was selected as an honorable mention for the Pushcart Prize. She's also a recipient of fellowships and grants from the MacDowell Colony, Breadloaf, and Massachusetts Cultural Council and the U.S. Department of State. She was born in Hyderabad, India, and grew up in Great Britain and the United States. She's a graduate of Swarthmore College and Northeastern University School of Law and lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Rishi, congratulations on your book, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Evan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the Booksmith and to India Currents for having me. It is really nice to still have sort of a pseudo tour around the country and to be in San Francisco without really being in San Francisco. So thank you, it's a pleasure to be here. So I wanted to read a little bit from Passage West, which is a novel based in California in the Imperial Valley. And it's the product of 12 years of research, 12 years of my life. I started writing it when my daughter was a year old, and I finished when she was 13 and a half. So this is sort of how I measure it. But the story is, at its core, the story of two frenemies, two men who farmed together in the Imperial Valley in the 1910s and 20s. And they were immigrants from Punjab. They formed a community with a few other Punjabis there, also with their neighbors who happened to be from Japan. And they got to know some Mexican women and married into that community. So this was the multicultural group that was in the Imperial Valley in the 1910s and 20s. So I'd like to read to you a little bit from the book, and then I'm very, very happy to answer questions about it. You know, right now it just feels like I'm sitting here by myself in my writing studio, and it's very lonely. So I would love to engage with some of you with questions about the book. So Ram and Karak, who are the two characters here, are at their core, they are frenemies, and they are diametrically opposed to each other. Ram is an innocent type of man, and he moves to the United States when he is 20 years old, and he leaves behind a bride, and his wife is pregnant, although they don't know it at the time that he leaves. And he does not meet that son for years and years into the future. He desperately wants to return to them, but because of obligations to his extended family, he's required to stay in Imperial Valley and farm and send money home, which was also a very common dynamic in those days. And his foil is Karak, who is a man of the world. He is an ex-soldier in the British Indian Army. He's traveled every place, and he's certainly not an innocent. And he comes to the US wanting to stay, and he fully embraces American values, or what he thinks of as American values. And the story follows 14 years of their lives together on a farm. And Karak convinces Ram to stay in the Imperial Valley and farm with him. And I wanted to read to you a little bit from that scene. So in this scene, the men are speaking in Punjabi. And just a few things about the scene. They repeat the word bhai, which means brother. And the land is owned by a Swiss immigrant named Egenberger. You'll hear that name be mentioned as well. So I will just start reading. And in my research of the novel, which entailed me talking with several of the children of the real life residents, inhabitants of the Imperial Valley in that era, many of the families talked about how the fathers, the Punjabi fathers, envisioned the land in California as reflecting the land that they knew in Punjab in their childhood. So that's sort of the setting for the way that that community came together in that area. So Ram and Karak stood at the corner of an alfalfa field that lay in neat strips of vibrant green and dirt brown. On one side lay the road they had just traveled. On the other, sand and scrub that stretched, uninterrupted, to the west. Gazing out at the horizon, the endless sky, the white slivers of cloud above Mount Signal, Ram forgot about his unsettled stomach. He had seen this moment before, felt this heat before, smelled the sandy loam and dust wind since he was a child. For a moment, the sky spun above him, but it was not only dizziness that he felt. If he looked past Karak's turban, past this sparse cluster of trees, he would see his uncle's farm near the edge of the lower Chenab Canal, water running from Himalayan snow and Shivalik rains, thundering, tremendous, toward the Indus River and the Arabian Sea. At the southeast corner of his uncle's land stood this same mesquite tree that sheltered tired travelers. The village woman would send them water in tin cups, rotis and chole served on leaves. On the far side, in blessed privacy, stood this hut where he and his wife spent their nights. A gust of wind lifted sand into Ram's eyes. His vision skewed. He saw a single point of light surrounded by darkness, but he was in the Imperial Valley. So in this scene, World War I is about to start in Europe, and that is a time that was quite momentous in terms of immigration laws and dynamics in the U.S. And it was a time in U.S. history that helped set the plate, so to speak, for what's happening now and for our modern life and the way that, you know, we think of immigration now. It's, you know, in the era of the Jim Crow laws that set up Black-white relations as well. So this is what pushed me into wanting to write about this time. So after that scene, Karak walks Ram around the property, and he makes his play for having Ram stay with him. So I'll read now. "Come and work with me," Karak said. "We will grow cotton. Everyone here says that there will be war in Europe soon. The cotton market will be high. We Punjabis know how to grow it. You will have too much, Ram, too much money to send home. You'll have to spend some here just for entertainment. And at home, everyone will be celebrating your name and honoring you." Ram felt a constriction in his chest. "I want to go home in 2 years, Bai," he said. "That is my only wish." 2 years, 3 years, whatever you want. The arrangement would be just the same as Jeevan's. Egenberger gets 1/3 profit. I will take half the crop. The rest is yours. You take half the crop? Ram was not sure that he heard correctly. Yes, I pay for the rental of mules and equipment. That's fair. You would get the remainder, Bai, Karak said, turning toward Ram. I said it already, didn't I? Far more than $2 a day. Ram's cheeks grew hot. He stared at the outline of the far hills, trying to swallow the anger. Half? He had come to Karak seeking refuge, wanting to confide about what had happened in the attack in Hambleton. He had hoped the man would lend him money for passage home. Even without knowing all of that, Karak was betraying him. So Karak grows angry at the end of this scene and decides to leave the valley the next day, all in a huff at him. He's still nursing these mysterious injuries that he has after an attack that was in the state of Washington. So he goes to the train by himself without telling Karak. The train arrived with the screech of metal against metal. The passenger cars were almost empty. Ram boarded, put his things on the seat beside him, and looked out the window. The car was searing hot. The train belched and groaned as the engine built up steam. The sound vibrated in his belly. In the safety of the train, for a moment, he felt calm. Karak had invited him to the valley as his guest, had offered work and a partnership. No one in his uncle's household would have thought him worthy of such honor. He felt another flicker of regret. But Karak was not honoring him. How long had he been plotting, forcing Ram to accept a lower profit? Was Ram not a man? Was he not worth more than that? Shouldn't he receive 1/3 of the profit? From a corner of his eye, Ram saw movement on the platform, the glimpse of a scarlet turban, then the hand at his window knocking hard. Karak stood there, speaking to him, but the sound was muffled by the train's breath, by the glass between them. Karak's face smiled at him, a crooked smile, a quick tilt of the head inviting him to come back out, as if nothing had happened. At first, Ram felt a flash of satisfaction. Karak had come back for him. But his grin was false. The man was false. Karak's knuckles hit the window again, harder. Ram heard the man's voice inside his head. You take things too seriously. Such a naive boy. Ram turned to look. Karak was yelling. Ram did not know if he heard faint words or heard his lips. Oye, come out. What are you doing in there? A vein appeared on the side of Karak's temple. He wasn't smiling now. The whistle blew like an alarm, blocking out all other sounds. Karak was still mouthing words. Ram saw Karak run to the ticket stand, talk briefly to the man, scribble on paper with a pen. The train nudged forward. Karak strode in long steps to the platform. The paper appeared in the window, slapped against the glass. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Ram stood and gathered his blanket, his bag. Wheels clicked against metal track. He grasped the back of a bench to keep his balance. At the door, the dust wind caught his cheek. Wooden floorboards flashed past his foot. He jumped easily, landing at the western edge of the platform. So I'll stop there for now. Evan, I don't know if you want to cut back in and.
Hi. That was lovely. Thank you, Rishi, for those readings. If you have any questions for Rishi, now's your chance to ask. We will be here standing by. Give folks a chance to ask some questions. Yeah. Maybe I could start, Rishi, by just asking. Obviously, this is a difficult time, a strange time to be releasing a book. I'm wondering if you're able to be like doing any writing right now, or are you zooming much? Are you on tour? Tell us a little bit about how you're dealing with the pandemic and the book launch.
Well, it's always really hard to write anything at all when a book, I think, first comes out, and because you're so distracted with the externalities. And writing is so internal. I find it very hard to be able to block all that out and just sit in solitude and write. It's very distracting. And then it's been, there's just been too much going on job-wise and social-wise and, society-wise, I guess. And so, no, I haven't been able to do any real writing at all other than a journal entry now and then. So.
For sure, I understand that. I'm in the similar boat myself.
Yeah.
Totally. I've got a question here from Mandeep, who is wondering. They say early years of South Asian immigrant settlement were very difficult with blatant racism. What were the conditions in India at this time that would motivate people to leave home and country and embark for America?
Yeah, so in Punjab, which is where these immigrants came from, there was a lot of they were. On a cyclical basis, there was drought in the farmlands up in Punjab, in land that's now part of Pakistan as well as India. And so there was some need for earning money abroad and sending it home for the family. And then there was also a family and cultural dynamic where land was often given only to the eldest son in the family, and the other children, the sons, the daughters were married often to other families, but the sons that were not the eldest son often had to find their own way to make a living because the land did not go to them. So often they were the ones who immigrated to different countries. And the family land would often be split up into many different parcels, and there was not a way to, make enough food and money for feeding a family. So that's what motivated a lot of the immigration here.
What motivated the story? How did the story come to you?
So I was in law school and read the story about Bhagat Singh Thind, who was a soldier who served in World War I for the U.S. Army and applied for American citizenship based on that Army service. And he gained his citizenship, but the Immigration and Naturalization Service appealed that citizenship, and that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then on the basis of race, which is how citizenship was granted in those days, he was not considered to be white in popular belief. And so although he was Caucasian, he was not white. And this was a distinction that the court drew and said that he was not of a race that was eligible for citizenship. So I first found out about this in law school, and we were reading these naturalization citizenship cases in a constitutional law class. And that got me very curious. I didn't even realize that there were South Asians in the country at that time, that early. And that led to the research that eventually led to the book.
It's fascinating.
And then I met a lot of the children of that generation. They were already in their 60s and 70s at the time that I met them. So that was how the book came about. They were the heart and soul of the book. They were what actually provided me with so many of the moving stories that find them, that I fictionalized. Wow. and put those experiences into the characters I wrote about.
Yeah. And so you've been kind of holding on to this story for a little bit. Was there something that have you been working on it? Yes, you said for how long?
I worked on it for about 12 years, and even earlier I started researching it, long before I started writing. And I looked at a lot of the contemporaneous newspaper articles and, even magazine, even song lyrics and scores. I mean, South Asia was really in the imagination of mainstream America then, although, in a marginalized, exoticized way. So there was material to be found there, and that surprised me too. And then in addition, there was another wave of immigrants other than the folks who came here to make money to send home. There was the intellectuals who were part of a revolutionary movement on the South Asian subcontinent who were trying to rally their forces against the British colonizers. And they found that coming to the US and having an area apart from British and Indian soil to sort of get support for their movement was useful to them. So a lot of them settled in California. And then in addition, they were influenced by American ideology and writings. And, you can see in their magazines and their publications how they quoted Thomas Jefferson and, a lot of our, what we consider the American patriots from the revolutionary times. So there was a lot of influence going on of America to India, India to America, South Asia to America as well.
So we have another couple questions that have come in. This is from Andrea, who says, I'm a native Californian, but my family was all in NorCal, so I'm finding it intriguing to learn of a way to learn about SoCal in this time period. This book is definitely going on my wish list. I'm amazed at the 12 years that you have put into it. What kept you going, Rishi?
It was just what kept me going. I think it was the thing that kept me sane. I had a lot of life changes during that time. And it was at least the thing that I could always come back to. It was a world, it was a world that was, of course, influenced by reality, but of my own making. So there was that bit. But I also felt very deeply that it was a story that deserved to be told. And the fact, my generation that I came to the US in 1971 as a 5-year-old, and that was the first wave of South Asian immigrants really that had come in our era, because immigration doors were opened again in 1965 after a long hiatus of time when, you know, immigration from Asia was really restricted. And that is actually part of what the book is about, how that came to be. So I just felt like the arrogance that my family and that wave of immigrants had in terms of not knowing who came before us, I started to feel like, wow, that is really, you know, that is something that needed to be corrected, or at least informed by telling the story. So that really is also what kept me going all that time.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that anybody would be allowed to fight for their country and then not be to fight for a country and then not to be granted that citizenship for any reason.
And you know, there's and that story repeats itself amongst the immigrant groups, which is also, you know, also written about in the book.
Right.
In more egregious ways, actually. Right. Yeah.
So we have a question from Runa, who's wondering what similarities in race relations do you find between the time of the book and now?
Yeah, what similarities do I find? I mean, I think that what was perhaps very, what happened in that era was that what a lot of the underlying systemic causes were actually found themselves legalized, like things that may not be in our laws now are actually very explicitly part of the law then. But it's not that by changing the law, you know, in 1947, we allowed Asian immigrants to come back in, or, you know, we got rid of the Jim Crow laws, or whatever, you know, we did explicitly and on the surface and on paper. Those dynamics are still reflected in the way that different parts of society talks to each other, and the attitudes that we have towards each other may not be, we may not have, you know, we don't have laws that say anymore that a Mexican woman cannot marry a Punjabi man, you know, which, because of the racial difference, the way that we had then. But there's still all sorts of societal restrictions and the way that people react to each other. And then this is also, it's that sort of, the white supremacists who at the time were very explicit and open, because of course that was just what society was then. You know, we were all in disbelief in 2016, weren't we, when we saw that dynamic become more and more obvious, but it was always there. When I was writing the book, I did so much research on that material, and it was really the 2016 election that made me give the book a certain form and shape, and cut it in a certain way. And I was grateful for having done all that research beforehand, because when that election came around, then I really found like I had a lot of material to help support what I had to say about it. So, you know, it was all, that reflection is still there. It's just in a slightly different form from 100 years ago. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So we have another question. This is from Mandeep, who's wondering, how was your family's settlement experience in America?
How was my family settlement experience in America? So we actually came to California first. That was we lived in a lot of different places during the course of my childhood. I mean, we lived in, after I was born in India, but then we moved to London and Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. And then first place we moved to in the US was Los Angeles, and then over to the East Coast, and then to the Midwest. I mean, I think that it's like 11 different places or something like that. But you know, so I was an only child, and it was very difficult to move that often. And it was very difficult in that era where there were so few South Asians in the United States to be an only child, you know, in that very transient type of family life. So I think that went a lot into how I wanted to write about Ram's experience, especially that sense of alienation he feels and his inability to adopt to America as his home country or as his home. So I think that experience for me really fed into the book. And, you know, to be in, I did feel there was something in me that I was writing about Los Angeles and Southern California, you know, as the first place that my family had lived too when I began the book. So.
Have you written about a place like that before? Do you
No,
think
it's actually my first time. So Karma and Other Stories is all in either in Boston or set in Kansas, where I did a lot of my growing up in high school, and where my family is one of 26 families, I think, from India at that time, when in the 1980s when I was there. So it was these little pockets of the Indian, very small Indian communities that I grew up in. But I had not, so we didn't stay in Los Angeles, which has a very large South Asian population now. You know, that was not my experience.
Right on. And do you anticipate? Have you his Cambridge? Is that showing up yet?
Cambridge.
Yeah.
Cambridge. Yeah, it has. It has. I think there's going to be more there.
For sure. For sure. Well, I just want to say, for those who are here watching with us, if you have questions for Rishi, please go ahead and drop them in the comments, and I'll pass them on. Excuse me. Getting some love, but it looks like that might be it for questions. I'll wait just another moment here. Yeah. I think that's it. That's it for tonight. Anything that you want to leave us with, Rishi?
Well, I just hope that the book can inspire some conversations around race, and that people can enjoy it, not only for, you know, I think there's these more serious things that it brings up, but also, you know, as an intercultural love story and a murder mystery, and, you know, all these other things that are in the book. So I hope it can inspire good conversation in both levels. Right.
For sure. Thank you, Rishi, and congratulations on your book. I want to encourage you all out there to support Rishi. You can get the book from Booksmith.com. Support Rishi and your favorite local independent bookstore. I'll drop the link in the comments again. I hope that we can do this in person at some point in the nearest future. Until then, thank you for joining us here virtually, and I hope that you all stay well and take care. Thank you again, Rishi.
I thank you, and I hope to be out there in person as well, and meet you in person, Evan, and visit the bookstore.
Anytime, just let us know.
All right, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.